600 degrees on one side of a steel plate, 3,000 degrees on the other. Between them, a water layer read through a glass tube no wider than a drinking straw. When water dropped below the crown sheet, steel lost half its strength in seconds, and a boiler holding the energy of 2,600 pounds of TNT had nowhere to go. We're counting down 10 disasters where that margin vanished. 10 times crews watched that window fail or chose to ignore it. Those are the numbers. These are the moments where the numbers became real, starting at number 10. In the 10th place, the best friend of Charleston set the pattern for every boiler disaster that followed. On a December morning in 1831, steam hissed from the safety valve as the locomotive built pressure for the day's run. The firemen, annoyed by the constant venting, tied down the only device that could relieve excess pressure, a spring-loaded valve meant to open at a fixed point. With the safety valve lashed shut, pressure inside the boiler crept past its design limit. The water glass, already primitive by modern standards, offered the crew little warning. When the boiler finally gave way, the blast killed the firemen instantly and scattered fragments across the Charleston rail yard. The coroner's report named the act directly. A human hand had defeated the last safeguard. Newspaper accounts from the Charleston Courier describe the valve being forced closed, and subsequent technical drawings from the Linda Hall Library show how early spring valves could be locked down with a simple lever. Within 2 years, South Carolina mandated tamper-resistant safety valves, patented in 1834 with a screw-lock governor to prevent manual closure. The best friend's low casualty count belied its impact. It proved that one moment of impatience at the valve could erase every inch of margin built into the metal and force the first regulatory step toward making locomotive safety a matter of law, not just trust. Number 9. The D&H mallet at Central Bridge shows how a hidden defect could trigger a chain reaction faster than any crew could contain. On July 15, 1910, the articulated 2662 was hauling the Adirondack Express across the Hudson River when a stay bolt on the rear boiler snapped. That 1 inch of steel, already fatigued by years of thermal cycling, failed without warning. Boiler pressure began to sag. The engineer, feeling the drag and watching the schedule slip, opened the throttle to compensate, an instinctive move that made the situation worse. With adhesion lost on the rain-slick rails, the drive wheels spun uncontrollably, and the locomotive slipped into a near runaway, rolling 2 miles before the brakes finally seized. Injuries totaled 15, but the deeper scar was procedural. The D&H accident file called out not just the broken stay, but the engineer's attempt to override physics with power, an error magnified by the relentless pressure to keep trains on time. This case stands apart. The boiler did not explode, but the margin was erased by a combination of metal fatigue, human reflex, and operational haste. It set the stage for later disasters where schedule and safety collided, and where small cracks in steel became cracks in judgment. 8th place. The explosion of New York's Central Hudson, number 5219 at Elkhart, in 1944 marked the point where wartime urgency overrode the last line of safety. With freight for the war effort stacked behind the tender and every minute under scrutiny, the fireman made a decision that would echo through the Interstate Commerce Commission's investigation. He raised the set point on the safety valve, disabling the boiler's only true relief. That act, meant to avoid a slowdown on a heavy grade, let boiler pressure climb past its 250 pounds per square inch design limit. In the cab, the water glass, a slim column no wider than a finger, offered the only hint as pressure and temperature rose together. On October 22nd, the crown sheet lost its water cover. In seconds, steel that should have stayed below 600 degrees Fahrenheit was exposed to firebox heat near 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The metal softened past 1,200 degrees Fahrenheit, the stays let go, and the boiler ruptured. Steam filled the cab, killing 2 crew members instantly. The locomotive rolled backward, colliding with a trailing freight. The Commission's report, number 44-239, called out the deliberate valve tampering linking it directly to the fatal overpressure. Wartime pressure had eroded not just the metal, but the culture of caution. Here, the numbers, pressure, temperature, expansion became a verdict. The margin was as thin as the glass, and for number 5219, it was gone. On April 3, 1943, New York Central J3, a number 5450, was pushing hard near Syracuse, running the 20th Century Limited with a hidden threat inside its boiler. The shop log had already flagged a cracked stay bolt on the crown sheet, critical hardware meant to hold the firebox roof against relentless pressure and heat. Wartime demands kept the locomotive in service, and the repair was postponed. As number 5450 gathered speed, the crew's only real-time warning was the water glass, a slim tube barely wider than a finger. A sudden drop in boiler pressure signaled trouble. The engineer tried to stabilize things by closing a valve, but the weakened stay bolt failed first. The crown sheet, now unsupported, faced direct flame. Steel that should have stayed at 600 degrees Fahrenheit was suddenly blasted past 1,200 degrees Fahrenheit, softening in seconds. The resulting rupture sent superheated steam into the cab and derailed the locomotive. One passenger died, several others suffered burns and trauma. The Interstate Commerce Commission report, number 43076, made the cause clear, a documented defect ignored. The New York Times initially reported 6 deaths, but the commission clarified there was only 1 fatality. This was no act of sabotage or a single bad decision. It was the slow danger of deferred maintenance, compounded by a crew forced to improvise. Inspection orders for all. J3A units followed, a stark reminder that every overlooked warning can erase the margin for safety. Number 6. C&O. T1, number 3020, brings the firebox margin down to a single mechanical point, the feed water pump. On June 19, 1948, the T1 was descending the Allegheny grade near White Sulphur Springs, with a heavy freight behind and the crew trusting the rhythmic pulse of the injector to keep water above the crown sheet. Midway down the slope, the feed water pump seized silently without warning. In the cab, the water glass, no wider than a finger, began to fall. The fireman, focused on the grade and the demands of restricted speed, ignored the alarm, hoping to avoid an unscheduled stop. But the physics of the boiler gave no room for hope. With the pump out, the water level dropped fast. The crown sheet, now exposed, was hit by firebox gas at nearly 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Steel that should have stayed below 600 degrees Fahrenheit soared past 1,200 degrees Fahrenheit in seconds, losing half its strength. The sheet softened, the stays let go, and the boiler exploded. 4 crew members were killed instantly. 2 others were thrown clear but survived with severe burns. The ICC's case file number 48112 traced the disaster to maintenance neglect of the feed water pump and a failure to enforce water level monitoring. This was no hidden crack or tampered valve, just a single point failure on a steep grade, turning a manageable descent into a lethal runaway. The event forced the railroad to confront a truth. Even the most powerful locomotive depended on a pump and a glass tube, and when either failed, the margin for survival vanished. Number 5. The C&O Allegheny passenger train in 1953 stands as the first case in this countdown where the firebox heat left a forensic fingerprint on the steel itself. On September 14, 1953. The locomotive was pushing hard through dense Allegheny fog, the crew nudging the safety valve higher to claw back lost time. In the cab, the water glass, a slim, easily clouded tube, offered the only lifeline between routine and disaster. When the crown sheet lost its water cover, firebox temperatures soared toward 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The steel, designed to hold at 600 degrees Fahrenheit, had no defense. Within seconds, the crown sheet softened past 1,200 degrees Fahrenheit, losing half its strength. Metallurgical analysis after the explosion found the telltale blue oxide discoloration, evidence that the steel had been pushed far beyond its rated limits, a visual record of the firebox eating the locomotive from within. The partial boiler separation left the cab twisted and the frame buckled, but spared mass casualties. About 10 suffered burns and trauma, yet no one died. The official inquiry, drawing on ASME strength curves and 1953 investigation notes, concluded that the blue-tempered steel was proof of a full thermal runaway. For the first time, the material itself testified. Here, the margin failed, and only luck kept the death toll low. This was no longer a question of a failed stay bolt or a missed pump cycle. The event marked the moment when steel, heat, and water level collided so violently that the boiler began to leave the frame, a prelude to the full structural breakups that would follow. Number 4. Norfolk and Western Class Y2 number 21583 is where the firebox margin failed so completely that the locomotive itself became a weapon. On May 2, 1955, climbing the Blue Ridge summit with 20 cars behind, the crew relied on a maintenance sign-off that dismissed a loose stay bolt as non-critical. The water glass, a narrow tube barely the width of a finger, offered no hint of what was building beneath the crown sheet. Inside the firebox, temperatures pressed close to 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The boiler water, meant to be a shield at 600 degrees Fahrenheit, was dropping fast. When the stay finally let go, the crown sheet lost its last anchor. In a fraction of a second, superheated water flashed to steam, expanding at a ratio of 1,600 to 1. The force tore the boiler from its mounts, launching it end over end down the grade. 2 crew members died instantly, 9 more were injured, and the blast broke couplers, sending runaway cars down the opposite slope. The Interstate Commerce Commission's report number 55098 laid out the sequence with forensic clarity. Inspection warnings ignored, training gaps unaddressed, and a catastrophic failure that turned a 400,000-pound locomotive into a kinetic missile. The event marked a threshold, no longer just a matter of burned steel or derailed trains, but of a machine so violently unbound that it left the rails entirely. Here, the numbers became motion, and the margin for error vanished with one overlooked bolt. At number 3, Southern Pacific number 704 in San Antonio stands as the deadliest locomotive boiler explosion in American history, a disaster so violent that it redefined the meaning of structural failure. On March 27, 1912, a repair crew at the Southern Pacific Roundhouse was preparing number 704 for service, unaware that the safety valve had been screwed down tight and the pressure gauge was broken from a prior accident. The firebox, burning at temperatures near 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit, sat inches below a boiler shell holding water at roughly 600 degrees Fahrenheit and 200 pounds per square inch of pressure. In that margin, the only warning was a water glass no wider than a finger. When the water dropped below the crown sheet, the steel, already losing half its strength above 1,200 degrees Fahrenheit, became soft in seconds. The explosion that followed was not just a rupture, it was a detonation. A 16,000-pound section of the boiler was hurled more than 1,000 feet, tearing through the roundhouse roof and crushing a nearby home. In total, 26 people died, shopmen, crew, and civilians, while dozens more suffered burns and trauma. The Interstate Commerce Commission's Bureau of Safety report documented the blast zone, the debris field, and the fatal sequence: a disabled valve, a broken gauge, a missed warning. The San Antonio disaster forced a reckoning. Federal regulators mandated tamper-resistant safety valves and standardized pressure gauge inspections across the rail industry. Boiler safety became national law. The photographs from that day, twisted iron, cratered earth, a city block leveled, became the enduring image of what happens when the firebox margin fails completely. Here, the locomotive did not just lose its crew, it became shrapnel, a weapon against its own city. The numbers, 16,000 pounds, 1,000 feet, 26 dead, remain unmatched. This was the moment when the firebox margin vanished, and the consequences became impossible to ignore. Number 2, Gettysburg Railroad. Number 1278 is the warning that history did not stay in the past. On October 8, 1995, a heritage steam excursion rolled through rural Pennsylvania, its cab occupied by volunteers rather than old-line railroaders. The locomotive's feedwater injector, a device meant to keep water above the crown sheet, had sprung a leak earlier in the run. Lacking spare parts and under pressure to complete the trip, the crew shut off the feed water system entirely. What remained was trust in the water glass, a narrow tube no wider than a finger, fogging and clearing as the engine rocked through the countryside. The boiler still held nearly 190 pounds per square inch, the water inside at 600 degrees Fahrenheit, and the firebox burning close to 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. With the injector off, the water level fell, exposing the crown sheet to direct flame. Steel that should never have seen more than 600 degrees Fahrenheit soared past 1,200 degrees Fahrenheit in seconds, losing half its strength. The margin, an inch of water, was gone. The crown sheet softened, the stays let go, and the resulting rupture filled the cab with superheated steam. Engineer John Goss suffered burns over 85% of his body and later died. The fireman and 2 others were badly injured. The National Transportation Safety Board report found no sabotage, no malice, just an operating decision made under stress, compounded by a fogged glass and a lack of formal procedures. The Gettysburg explosion did not happen in an era of mass ignorance or crude technology. It happened in a time of nostalgia, with modern safety rules on the books, but institutional memory fading. The verdict was clear: the physics of the firebox had not changed. The only protection was the same as it had always been: a working injector, a clear glass, and a crew trained to stop when the margin thinned. After Gettysburg, the Federal Railroad Administration mandated redundant water level monitoring and formalized emergency shutdown procedures for all heritage steam operations. The lesson was not about the past, but about the persistence of risk. Even in the late 20th century, the firebox margin remained razor thin, and a single decision could erase it. And finally, in first place, the deadliest thermal runaway is no longer a relic of the steam era. Today, the threat has simply changed form. In a modern diesel locomotive, the engine's safety margin is measured in oil pressure and turbocharger seals, not water glass and crown sheet. But the physics remain just as unforgiving. When a turbocharger oil seal fails, engine oil is sucked straight into the intake manifold. The engine, designed to burn diesel fuel, suddenly finds itself drinking its own lubricant, an energy source it cannot regulate. As oil floods the cylinders, combustion becomes self-sustaining. RPM climbs past redline, and the governor, meant to limit speed, becomes useless. The crew can cut the fuel supply, even hit the emergency kill, but it will not matter. The engine is now running on a fire it cannot extinguish, feeding itself in a runaway loop. Temperatures inside the combustion chamber spike, exhaust gas soars, and the turbo spins faster, drawing in still more oil. The feedback is immediate and brutal. Overspeed alarms scream as the tachometer sweeps past safe limits. In documented cases, large diesels have surged from 900 RPM to over 4,000 in under 30 seconds. Mechanical failure is inevitable. Connecting rods shear, pistons shatter, and sometimes the engine block itself bursts, spraying flaming oil across the engine room. When the runaway finally stops, it is not because the crew intervened, it is because the machine has destroyed itself or caught fire. The National Transportation Safety Board and Federal Railroad Administration have tracked these incidents since the early 2000s. Their reports describe near misses where only a failed rod or an emergency carbon dioxide dump prevented a full locomotive fire. Railroads now specify overspeed governors, intake shutoff valves, and oil seal monitoring sensors as standard equipment. But the reality is clear. The diesel runaway is the modern face of a problem as old as railroading itself. The buffer between safe operation and catastrophe is measured in seconds, not minutes. There is no water glass to watch, no steam whistle to warn. Just a rising howl, a needle climbing, and the knowledge that once the feedback loop begins, intervention is nearly impossible. The lesson endures, the margin is razor thin, and the laws of physics do not care about experience or training. 3,000 degrees does not negotiate. It waits for the inch of margin to disappear, and then it takes everything. Across all 10 disasters, one pattern holds. Survival hinged on a water glass no wider than a straw, balancing 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit flame against 600 degrees Fahrenheit water and 200 pounds per square inch. Lose 1 inch and steel loses half its strength. The equivalent of 2,600 pounds of TNT would be released. 3,000 degrees does not negotiate. It waits for the inch of water to disappear, and then it takes everything.